They say the badge is a symbol of trust, a shield against chaos. But what happens when the chaos comes from within, when the very hand that upholds the law is stained by deceit? This isn't just a story about a husband's affair. It's about the chilling betrayal of public trust, the abuse of power, and the silent unraveling of a life built on lies. Just wait until you see what an anonymous email exposed about the man I married, a man sworn to protect and serve. My name is Chloe. For years, my life was intertwined with the blue uniform, the siren's wail, the unspoken code of the force. My husband David was a police officer, a man I admired, a man I believed in. He was strong, principled, dedicated to his work, a pillar of our community. Our marriage from the outside was a testament to shared values, mutual respect, and a deep, abiding love. I understood the demands of his job, the long hours, the inherent dangers. I was his rock, his confidante, the quiet support system behind the badge. I believed in the transparency of our relationship, the unspoken understanding that we had no secrets from each other. I was the woman who stood by her man, through thick and thin, through the triumphs and the tragedies of a life dedicated to law enforcement, until the day the silence grew too loud, the distance too vast, the unspoken truths too heavy to bear, until the day the man I loved, the man I trusted, began to reveal the rot beneath the polished surface, a rot that threatened to consume not just our marriage, but the very fabric of justice he was sworn to uphold. It started subtly, like a faint, almost imperceptible crack in the foundation of our seemingly solid marriage. David, usually so present, so engaged, began to drift. His late nights at the precinct became more frequent, his explanations more vague. He'd return home, smelling faintly of unfamiliar perfume, his eyes a little too bright, his smile a little too forced. I'd attribute it to the pressures of his demanding profession, the weight of his responsibilities as a police officer. He was under stress, I told myself, and I, as his supportive wife, needed to be understanding. But the emotional distance grew, a chasm opening between us that no amount of shared dinners or quiet evenings could bridge. Our conversations became superficial, devoid of the intimacy we once shared. He'd dismiss my concerns with a wave of his hand, a patronizing smile, or a quick change of subject. I'd find myself staring at him across the dinner table, a stranger in my own home, wondering where the man I married had gone. The unease grew, a persistent hum beneath the surface of our perfect lives. It was like a tiny, persistent crack in a priceless piece of pottery. Individually, each discrepancy was minor. Collectively, they began to form a dissonant chord, a subtle warning that something was fundamentally wrong with the harmony of my marriage and the integrity of his professional life. I noticed a new, almost possessive attachment to his work phone, a quick flick of his wrist to hide the screen when I walked into the room. He started taking calls in private, his voice hushed, his demeanor guarded. He, who had always been so transparent, so open, was now shrouded in a veil of secrecy. And the more I observed, the more I realized that this wasn't just about a casual distraction. This was about a deliberate, calculated act of deception, a hidden life he was building, one secret at a time, outside the confines of our marriage and his sworn duty. His work phone became an extension of him, clutched tightly, even in moments of intimacy. He'd take it to the bathroom, to the kitchen, even to bed, a constant, silent companion. Our shared moments, once filled with laughter and easy conversation, became punctuated by the soft glow of his screen, the rhythmic tap of his fingers. I'd hear the faint ping of notifications, even when his phone was supposedly on silent. He'd often mention a new colleague, Officer Sarah Jenkins, a rising star in their department. He'd speak of her with a casual admiration that, at first, I dismissed as professional respect. But then the mentions became more frequent, more detailed. He'd praise her sharp mind, her dedication, her ability to handle difficult situations. I'd see her name pop up in his texts, in his emails, always work-related, always seemingly innocuous. But the unease grew. I'd see them together at department functions, a little too close, a little too comfortable. Their laughter would linger a moment too long. Their eyes would meet with a knowing glance. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it away. They were colleagues, partners, facing the daily dangers of their profession together. It was natural for them to form a close bond, but the subtle shifts in his behavior, the increasing secrecy around his phone, the growing emotional distance, they all pointed to a single, undeniable truth. The woman I had welcomed into our social circle, the woman I had admired for her dedication to the force, was now a threat, a silent, insidious presence in my marriage. And the more I observed, the more I realized that this wasn't just about a casual friendship. This was about a deliberate, calculated act of betrayal, a hidden life he was building, one secret at a time, with a woman who wore the same badge as him. The anonymous email arrived on a Tuesday morning, a digital bomb detonating in the quiet solitude of my home. The subject line was stark, concerning Officer David Miller. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I opened it, my fingers trembling, half expecting a complaint, a minor disciplinary issue. What I found instead was a meticulously compiled dossier of betrayal, a chilling chronicle of his infidelity. The email contained irrefutable evidence. High-resolution photos of David and Sarah, their faces too close, their smiles too intimate, taken in places I recognized. A secluded park, a dimly lit restaurant, even a discreet hotel near the precinct. Each photo was accompanied by precise timestamps, detailing their secret rendezvous, their stolen moments of intimacy. There were screenshots of their text messages, their conversations filled with pet names, inside jokes, and explicit declarations of love. Details of their secret rendezvous, their preferred meeting spots, their alibis, all laid bare, cold and clinical, in the stark white of the email. The raw, visceral pain of discovery hit me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the audacity, the blatant disregard for our marriage, for his sworn duty, for the trust I had placed in him. The email was a digital bomb, exploding in my carefully constructed world, leaving nothing but shattered fragments of a life I no longer recognized. The anonymous sender, a ghost in the machine, had delivered the truth, unvarnished and brutal. And in that moment, I knew, with a chilling certainty, that my life, irrevocably altered, could never be the same. The initial shock was a suffocating blanket, leaving me numb, disoriented, unable to process the enormity of the betrayal. My mind reeled, replaying every subtle sign, every evasive answer, every late night. The puzzle pieces, once scattered and meaningless, now clicked into place with horrifying precision. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted implicitly, was a stranger, a master of deception, living a double life right under my nose. The pain was immense, a raw wound that throbbed with every memory of our shared life, our shared purpose. But beneath the heartbreak, a cold, calculated resolve began to form. My first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to demand answers, to unleash the torrent of pain and rage that threatened to consume me. But then a different thought emerged, a quiet whisper of strategy, a flicker of my own understanding of the world he inhabited. I knew David. I knew his temperament, his ability to manipulate, to deny, to turn the narrative against me. A direct confrontation would only lead to a messy, emotional battle, a public spectacle that would leave me vulnerable and exposed. No. I needed to be strategic. I needed to use my knowledge of his world, of police procedures, of the internal workings of the force to my advantage. The emotional toll of living with this knowledge was immense. I felt a profound sense of isolation, unable to confide in anyone, trapped in a silent world of betrayal. But the pain began to morph into a steely determination. This wasn't about a momentary outburst. It was about justice, about reclaiming my life, and about exposing the truth in a way that would resonate, not just with me, but with the institution he had so brazenly betrayed. The anonymous email was my weapon, and I, the quiet wife, would be the architect of his downfall, using his own carefully constructed world against him. My years as a police wife, immersed in the culture of the force, had inadvertently equipped me with a unique understanding of its inner workings. I knew the chain of command, the internal affairs protocols, the unwritten rules of conduct. I had heard countless stories of officers being investigated, of careers ending in disgrace, of the meticulous process of gathering evidence and building a case. This knowledge, once a passive understanding, now became my most potent weapon. I knew that a direct accusation from a scorned wife would be easily dismissed, spun as emotional revenge. But an anonymous tip, seemingly from within the department, containing irrefutable evidence, that would be taken seriously. That would trigger an internal investigation, a process that, once set in motion, was almost impossible to stop. I understood the importance of discretion, of anonymity, of making the leak appear organic, as if it had come from a disgruntled colleague, a concerned citizen, or even an internal whistleblower. I knew the language they used, the protocols they followed, the vulnerabilities they possessed. This wasn't about emotional outbursts. It was about precision, about leveraging my intimate knowledge of his world to ensure maximum impact. I spent hours poring over the anonymous email, analyzing every detail, every timestamp, every piece of evidence. I began to formulate a plan, a strategy that would expose David's infidelity and his abuse of power, not through a public confrontation, but through the very system he was sworn to uphold. The knowledge of police procedures, once a mundane aspect of my daily life, now became the blueprint for his undoing, a silent, insidious force that would dismantle his life, piece by painful piece. As I meticulously planned my strategic leak, a subtle yet persistent anomaly in the anonymous email began to surface. The sender, while anonymous, had used a specific, almost coded language when referring to certain internal police operations that David had been heavily involved in. A fleeting thought, a whisper of unease, suggested that David's affair and his abuse of power weren't just about personal gratification. There were subtle mentions of case files, of evidence tampering, of informant protection in the email, all linked to a high-profile, unsolved case David had been working on. It looked like David's affair and his public persona were not just about personal indiscretion. They were a distraction, a brilliant, cruel smokescreen. While he was busy cultivating his secret life with Sarah, and I was consumed by his infidelity, a far more insidious plot was lurking beneath the surface. A plot to exploit his position to compromise ongoing investigations, or perhaps to protect a criminal enterprise. The betrayal was a dagger, but these digital breadcrumbs, these brief, unsettling glimpses into a world beyond simple infidelity, felt like a poison, slowly seeping into the very core of my being. It hinted at a deeper, more insidious betrayal, a connection I couldn't yet grasp, but one that promised to unravel far more than just my marriage. This wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about a broken trust on a much grander, more manipulative, and potentially criminal scale, and I had only just scratched the surface of a police corruption conspiracy. The anonymous email, a digital dagger to my heart, had also provided me with a chilling clarity. Confronting David directly was not an option. His charm, his manipulative nature, his ability to twist narratives, I knew he would deny everything, gaslight me, and turn me into the villain. But I also knew his world, the intricate web of rules and regulations that governed his profession. I had spent years listening to his stories, absorbing the nuances of police procedures, the unwritten codes of conduct. This knowledge, once a passive understanding, now became my most potent weapon. My decision to act was not born of rage, but of a cold, calculated resolve. This wasn't about emotional revenge. It was about justice, about holding him accountable for his betrayal, not just to me, but to the badge he wore, to the public trust he had so brazenly violated. The thought of exposing him, of bringing down the man I had once loved, was agonizing. But the alternative, allowing him to continue his deceit, to continue abusing his power, to continue living a lie, was unthinkable. I knew the risks, the potential for backlash, the accusations of being a scorned wife, the possibility of damaging my own reputation. But the need for truth, for an end to the agonizing uncertainty, outweighed every fear. I would use his own system against him, a silent, insidious force that would dismantle his life, piece by painful piece. The stage was set, not in a courtroom, but within the hallowed halls of internal affairs, and the curtain was about to rise on David's true character. My plan was meticulous, a chess game played in the shadows of the police department. The goal was to leak the information to internal affairs, but in a way that would make it appear to come from an anonymous source within the department, ensuring maximum credibility and minimizing any suspicion on me. I knew the internal affairs protocols, the specific channels for reporting misconduct, the language they used. I crafted a carefully worded email, stripping away any personal emotion, presenting only the cold, hard facts, the photos, the timestamps, the details of their secret rendezvous. I made sure to include specific details about police procedures, about David's daily routine, about the internal workings of the department, details that only an insider would know. This would lend authenticity to the anonymous source, making it appear as if a concerned colleague, a disgruntled subordinate, or even an internal whistleblower was exposing the truth. I used a burner email account, accessed from a public library computer, ensuring no digital trace could lead back to me. I timed the email's delivery to coincide with a shift change, a moment of heightened activity within the department, further obscuring its origin. I even included a subtle hint about David's abuse of power, a fleeting mention of how he might be using his position to facilitate the affair or cover his tracks, knowing that internal affairs would follow that thread. Every detail was meticulously planned, every word chosen with precision. It was a digital ghost operation designed to trigger an investigation that would expose David's deceit, not through my direct confrontation, but through the very system he was sworn to uphold. The leak was not a weapon of destruction, but a tool of revelation, designed to expose the truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. The internal investigation began subtly, like a ripple in a seemingly calm pond. I noticed the shifts first, the subtle changes in the department's atmosphere, the hushed conversations in the hallways, the furtive glances, the sudden increase in internal affairs presence. David, oblivious at first, continued his routine, his arrogance a shield against the brewing storm. But then the scrutiny began to tighten. His colleagues, once jovial and familiar, became guarded, their conversations clipped, their eyes averted. He was called into unexpected meetings, his explanations becoming increasingly vague, his demeanor more agitated. I watched, a silent observer, as the net slowly tightened around him. Internal affairs, true to their meticulous nature, began to dissect his daily routine, his work assignments, his interactions with Sarah. They interviewed his colleagues, reviewed his call logs, scrutinized his expense reports. The initial focus was on the affair, but the subtle hints I had woven into the anonymous email began to bear fruit. They started looking into his use of departmental resources, his access to sensitive information, his decision-making in certain cases. The tension in our home became palpable. David was irritable, paranoid, constantly checking his phone, muttering about internal politics and jealous colleagues. He suspected a leak, but his arrogance prevented him from considering the true source. He was convinced it was someone within the force, a rival, a disgruntled subordinate. The irony was not lost on me. He was hunting for a ghost, unaware that the ghost was me, silently orchestrating his downfall from the shadows. The internal investigation, once a distant possibility, was now a tangible reality, a slow-burning fuse leading to an inevitable explosion. David's dawning realization was a slow, agonizing process, a gradual descent into paranoia and desperation. At first, he dismissed the internal affairs inquiries as routine, a minor inconvenience. But as the questions grew sharper, the scrutiny more intense, a flicker of unease began to creep into his confident demeanor. He started coming home late, his face etched with worry, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He'd pace the floors, muttering to himself, replaying conversations, trying to pinpoint the source of the leak. He suspected everyone, from his closest colleagues to his most junior subordinates. He became obsessed with his work phone, constantly checking for messages, for updates, for any sign of who was orchestrating his downfall. He tried to cover his tracks, deleting messages, altering schedules, fabricating alibis. But internal affairs, relentless in their pursuit of truth, was always one step ahead. The evidence I had provided, combined with their own meticulous investigation, was slowly but surely building an irrefutable case against him. He grew increasingly agitated, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. Our home, once a sanctuary, became a battleground of unspoken accusations and simmering resentment. He'd lash out at me, accusing me of being unsupportive, of not understanding the pressures of his job. I remained calm, a silent observer, watching his carefully constructed world crumble around him. He was a cornered animal, desperate and dangerous, but his desperation only served to further expose his guilt. The man who had once exuded confidence and authority was now a shell of his former self, consumed by fear and paranoia. His dawning realization was a bitter symphony of self-destruction, a testament to the power of truth, even when delivered anonymously. The internal investigation, initially focused on the affair, began to uncover a far more insidious truth. David's blatant abuse of power, the anonymous email with its subtle hints, had guided internal affairs down a rabbit hole of corruption and misconduct. They discovered instances where he had used his position to facilitate his secret rendezvous with Sarah, manipulating schedules, misusing departmental vehicles, and even leveraging his authority to silence potential witnesses. They found evidence of him accessing confidential case files, not for official purposes, but to gather information that could benefit his mistress or cover his tracks. There were instances of him using his influence to secure favorable assignments for Sarah, to fast-track her promotions, and to protect her from disciplinary action. The scope of his misconduct widened, revealing a pattern of behavior that went far beyond a simple affair. He had systematically exploited his position of trust, using the badge he wore as a shield for his illicit activities. The internal investigation, once a discreet inquiry, became a full-blown criminal investigation, exposing a web of corruption that reached far deeper than anyone had initially imagined. The man who had once been a symbol of law and order was now revealed to be a perpetrator of injustice, a man who had betrayed not just his wife, but the very principles he was sworn to uphold. The unveiling of his abuse of power was a chilling testament to the corrupting influence of unchecked authority, a stark reminder that even those sworn to protect can become the greatest threat. As the internal investigation delved deeper into David's abuse of power, a subtle yet persistent anomaly in the anonymous email began to resurface. The sender, while anonymous, had used a specific, almost coded language when referring to certain internal police operations that David had been heavily involved in. A fleeting thought, a whisper of unease, suggested that David's affair and his abuse of power weren't just about personal gratification. There were subtle mentions of case files, of evidence tampering, of informant protection in the email, all linked to a high-profile, unsolved case David had been working on. It looked like David's affair and his public persona were not just about personal indiscretion. They were a distraction, a brilliant, cruel smokescreen. While he was busy cultivating his secret life with Sarah, and I was consumed by his infidelity, a far more insidious plot was lurking beneath the surface, a plot to exploit his position to compromise ongoing investigations, or perhaps to protect a criminal enterprise. The betrayal was a dagger, but these digital breadcrumbs, these brief, unsettling glimpses into a world beyond simple infidelity, felt like a poison slowly seeping into the very core of my being. It hinted at a deeper, more insidious betrayal, a connection I couldn't yet grasp, but one that promised to unravel far more than just my marriage. This wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about a broken trust on a much grander, more manipulative, and potentially criminal scale, and I had only just scratched the surface of a police corruption conspiracy. The internal investigation, once a hushed secret within the department, exploded into a public scandal with the force of a detonated bomb. The findings, meticulously compiled by Internal Affairs, were leaked to the press, not by me, but by the very system that had been compromised. The headlines screamed, "Police officer accused of affair, abuse of power, Officer David Miller under investigation for misconduct." The story went viral within minutes, dominating local news channels and social media feeds. The public, who had once admired David as a dedicated officer, now recoiled in shock and outrage. His name, once synonymous with law and order, became a byword for corruption and betrayal. The police department, eager to distance itself from the scandal, issued a terse public statement, confirming the ongoing investigation and emphasizing their commitment to transparency and accountability. The media frenzy was relentless. Reporters camped outside our house, their cameras flashing, their microphones thrust forward, demanding answers. My phone rang incessantly with calls from concerned friends, curious acquaintances, and frantic family members. I remained silent, a quiet observer of the chaos I had set in motion. This wasn't about personal revenge anymore. It was about a public reckoning, a systemic cleansing. The scandal wasn't just about David's affair. It was about the abuse of power, the betrayal of public trust, the tarnishing of the badge. The public outrage was palpable. a collective roar of disappointment and anger. The very institution he was sworn to uphold was now under scrutiny, its integrity questioned, its reputation tarnished by his actions. The public had spoken, and their verdict was clear: guilty. His carefully curated image, the one he had used to deceive so many, was now irrevocably shattered, replaced by the ugly truth of his character. The fall from grace was absolute, a fitting consequence for his calculated deceit and betrayal. He had sought to ruin my life. Instead, he had ruined himself, professionally, socially, and personally, in the most public way imaginable. David's dismissal from the force was swift and brutal, a stark testament to the unforgiving nature of public scrutiny and institutional accountability. The internal investigation, fueled by the irrefutable evidence I had provided and their own diligent work, left no room for doubt. He was called into a final disciplinary hearing, a mere formality, where the overwhelming evidence of his affair, his abuse of power, and his blatant disregard for departmental regulations was laid bare. His attempts at denial, his desperate pleas for leniency, were met with a cold, unyielding resolve. The police chief, in a public press conference, announced his immediate termination, citing a severe breach of public trust and a gross violation of departmental ethics. The news spread like wildfire, a final, crushing blow to his once illustrious career. His badge, a symbol of his authority and his identity, was stripped away. His pension, his benefits, his entire professional future vanished in an instant. He was no longer Officer David Miller. He was simply David, an unemployed man facing public disgrace and an uncertain future. The public shaming was relentless. Social media, once a platform for his professional achievements, became a relentless torrent of condemnation. His name was dragged through the mud, his every past action re-examined through the lens of his exposed deceit. He became a pariah, a cautionary tale, a symbol of unchecked power and moral decay. His former colleagues, once his loyal comrades, now distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with his public disgrace. His phone, once constantly buzzing with calls from admirers and colleagues, now rang only with the demands of his lawyers and the accusations of his creditors. He was a man utterly alone, stripped of his identity, his purpose, and his reputation. I watched, not with glee, but with a grim satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about accountability. It was about ensuring that his manipulative tactics, his predatory behavior, would never again find fertile ground. The public had spoken, and their verdict was clear: guilty. His carefully curated image, the one he had used to deceive so many, was now irrevocably shattered, replaced by the ugly truth of his character. The fall from grace was absolute, a fitting consequence for his calculated deceit and betrayal. He had sought to ruin my life. Instead, he had ruined himself, professionally, socially, and personally. Officer Sarah Jenkins, the junior colleague, the mistress, found herself caught in the crossfire of David's public downfall. Her involvement in the affair, initially a secret, was now laid bare for the world to see. The public, fueled by outrage, turned their attention to her, dissecting her role in the scandal. Her career, once promising, was now in tatters. The police department, in its efforts to clean house, suspended her, pending their own internal investigation. Her colleagues, who had once seen her as a rising star, now viewed her with a mixture of pity and contempt. The public shaming was profound. Social media, once a platform for her professional achievements, became a relentless torrent of condemnation. She was branded a homewrecker, a gold digger, a woman who had used her position to exploit a married man. The intimate photos, the timestamps, the details of their secret rendezvous, all now public knowledge, fueling the narrative of her complicity. David, in his desperation, tried to shift all blame onto her, painting her as the manipulative temptress who had led him astray. But the evidence, the photos, the internal affairs report told a different story. She was not just a mistress. She was a willing participant, a beneficiary of his illicit activities, and a co-conspirator in his abuse of power. The consequences were severe. Her professional reputation was destroyed, her career prospects vanished, and her personal life became a public spectacle. She was abandoned by David, who in his self-preservation cut all ties, leaving her to face the consequences alone. The poetic justice of it was not lost on me. She had gained nothing but a ruined reputation, and in her ambition, she sealed her own professional and personal demise. The once promising young officer, now a pariah, a cautionary tale for those who sought shortcuts to success. Her fall from grace, though less dramatic than David's, was equally devastating, leaving her with nothing but the bitter taste of public shame and a future devoid of the respect she once craved. While David faced public ruin, I quietly secured my divorce and a significant financial settlement. My approach was methodical, dispassionate, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil that had consumed me for months. I had already taken proactive steps, consulting with my legal team to ensure a swift and clean separation of assets. The evidence of his infidelity, his abuse of power, and his blatant disregard for departmental regulations was irrefutable. It left him with no legal recourse, no leverage, no room for negotiation. The divorce proceedings were swift, almost clinical. There were no protracted battles, no messy public disputes. The evidence spoke for itself, and his legal team, faced with the undeniable truth, advised him to concede. I secured a significant financial settlement, ensuring that his betrayal would not leave me financially vulnerable. My focus was on disentangling my life from his, severing every tie that bound me to his deceit. I changed my routines, my social circles, even my personal investments, creating a new, unburdened existence. The quiet securing of my divorce and the significant settlement were not acts of vengeance, but acts of self-preservation. I was reclaiming my life, piece by painful piece, from the wreckage of his betrayal. The process was not without its emotional cost, but the clarity of purpose, the knowledge that I was acting with integrity and truth, provided a strange sense of peace. I was rebuilding my life, not on the ruins of his, but on a foundation of honesty and self-respect. The anonymous tip-off had not only revealed his truth, but had also liberated me, allowing me to move forward, free from the deceit that had poisoned my life for so long. As the dust settled on David's public downfall, and I began to rebuild my life, a subtle yet persistent anomaly in the anonymous email began to resurface. The sender, while anonymous, had used a specific, almost coded language when referring to certain internal police operations that David had been heavily involved in. A fleeting thought, a whisper of unease, suggested that David's affair and his abuse of power weren't just about personal gratification. There were subtle mentions of case files, of evidence tampering, of informant protection in the email, all linked to a high-profile, unsolved case David had been working on. It looked like David's affair and his public persona were not just about personal indiscretion. They were a distraction, a brilliant, cruel smokescreen. While he was busy cultivating his secret life with Sarah, and I was consumed by his infidelity, a far more insidious plot was lurking beneath the surface, a plot to exploit his position to compromise ongoing investigations, or perhaps to protect a criminal enterprise. The betrayal was a dagger, but these digital breadcrumbs, these brief, unsettling glimpses into a world beyond simple infidelity, felt like a poison, slowly seeping into the very core of my being. It hinted at a deeper, more insidious betrayal, a connection I couldn't yet grasp, but one that promised to unravel far more than just my marriage. This wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about a broken trust on a much grander, more manipulative, and potentially criminal scale, and I had only just scratched the surface of a police corruption conspiracy. The unsolved case. It had haunted David for months, a cold trail, a dead end, but the anonymous email with its cryptic references had reignited my curiosity. I began to discreetly research the case, using my knowledge of police procedures to access public records, news archives, and even old departmental reports. What I found sent a chill down my spine. The case involved a series of high-profile burglaries, targeting wealthy individuals with a distinct modus operandi. No forced entry, no alarms triggered, almost as if the perpetrators had inside information. And then, the connection. One of the victims was a prominent figure in the city, a man with known ties to organized crime. And David, I discovered, had been the lead investigator on that specific burglary. The pieces began to click into place with horrifying precision. The affair with Sarah, the abuse of power, the subtle hints in the anonymous email, they were all interconnected, part of a larger, more sinister scheme. David wasn't just having an affair. He was compromised. He was using his position, his access to sensitive information, to facilitate these burglaries, to protect the criminal enterprise. Sarah, I realized, was not just a mistress. She was a co-conspirator, an accomplice, using her position within the force to provide him with cover, to manipulate evidence, to ensure the success of their illicit operations. The anonymous email, I now understood, wasn't just a tip-off about an affair. It was a desperate plea for help, a cry for justice from someone within the department who had witnessed the corruption and dared to expose it. The betrayal was a dagger, but this deeper, more insidious truth felt like a poison, slowly seeping into the very core of my being. It hinted at a police corruption conspiracy that reached the highest levels, a network of dirty cops, and a criminal enterprise that had been operating with impunity, all under the guise of law enforcement. And I had only just scratched the surface of a truth that promised to unravel far more than just my marriage. This wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about a broken trust on a much grander, more manipulative, and potentially criminal scale. And I was now standing at the precipice of exposing a truth that would shake the very foundations of the city. The public scandal, the dismissal from the force, the public disgrace. David's world imploded with a force that reverberated through every corner of the city. For me, the immediate aftermath was a complex tapestry of relief, vindication, and a profound sense of responsibility. The house, once our shared sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum of shattered dreams. I sold it, eager to shed every last vestige of a past that had become a lie. The process was painful, a constant excavation of emotional debris. But each step forward, no matter how small, felt like a victory. I was shedding the old skin, preparing for a new beginning, a new chapter built on authenticity and truth. The initial storm of sensationalism eventually subsided, replaced by a quiet, determined resolve within me. The public exposure was a crucial first step, a necessary act of personal justice, but the true work of rebuilding, of healing, had just begun. And this time I was building on a foundation of genuine connection, not hidden agendas. David's downfall was absolute. His badge, his pension, his entire professional life vanished in an instant. He was no longer Officer David Miller. He was simply David, an unemployed man facing public disgrace and an uncertain future. Sarah Jenkins, too, faced professional ruin. Her career prospects vanished, and her name synonymous with scandal. The city, once so eager to celebrate David, now recoiled from him, his name a byword for deceit. I watched, not with glee, but with a grim satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about accountability. It was about ensuring that his manipulative tactics, his predatory behavior, would never again find fertile ground. The public had spoken, and their verdict was clear: guilty. His carefully curated image, the one he had used to deceive so many, was now irrevocably shattered, replaced by the ugly truth of his character. The fall from grace was absolute, a fitting consequence for his calculated deceit and betrayal. He had sought to ruin my life. Instead, he had ruined himself, professionally, socially, and personally. Healing, I discovered, was not a linear path. It was a winding road with unexpected detours into grief, anger, and profound sadness. The emotional scars of betrayal ran deep, but I was determined not to let them define my future. I sought professional help, engaging with a therapist who guided me through the labyrinth of shattered trust and emotional trauma. It was a difficult, often painful process, but essential for true recovery. I reconnected with old friends, those who had stood by me, offering unwavering support without judgment. I rediscovered passions I had long neglected, finding solace in long walks in nature, the quiet contemplation of art, and the challenge of learning a new skill. My story, once a private torment, became a beacon of hope for countless others trapped in similar webs of deceit. I used my newfound freedom to move to a new city, a place where I could rebuild my life away from the drama, away from the whispers, away from the ghosts of a past I was determined to leave behind. It was a fresh start, a blank canvas upon which to paint a new future. I found a new community, new friends, and a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was building a new identity, a new sense of self, free from the constraints of his deceit. The transformation was profound, not just for me, but for the countless individuals who found their own voices through mine. The anonymous tip-off, once a source of my pain, had become the catalyst for my greatest personal triumph, a testament to the enduring power of integrity and the strength of the human spirit. I learned to trust my instincts again, to recognize the subtle signs of manipulation, and to value authenticity above all else. My journey was far from over, but I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, a warrior, armed with the truth and a renewed sense of self-worth. The quiet securing of my divorce and the significant settlement were not acts of vengeance, but acts of self-preservation. I was reclaiming my life, piece by painful piece, from the wreckage of his betrayal. The process was not without its emotional cost, but the clarity of purpose, the knowledge that I was acting with integrity and truth, provided a strange sense of peace. I was rebuilding my life, not on the ruins of his, but on a foundation of honesty and self-respect. The anonymous tip-off had not only revealed his truth, but had also liberated me, allowing me to move forward, free from the deceit that had poisoned my life for so long. As I settled into my new life, a quiet sense of peace began to replace the lingering echoes of betrayal. But then, a subtle yet persistent anomaly in the anonymous email began to resurface, not as a whisper, but as a chilling roar. The sender, while anonymous, had used a specific, almost coded language when referring to certain internal police operations that David had been heavily involved in. A fleeting thought, a whisper of unease, suggested that David's affair and his abuse of power weren't just about personal gratification. There were subtle mentions of case files, of evidence tampering, of informant protection in the email, all linked to a high-profile, unsolved case David had been working on. It looked like David's affair and his public persona were not just about personal indiscretion. They were a distraction, a brilliant, cruel smokescreen. While he was busy cultivating his secret life with Sarah, and I was consumed by his infidelity, a far more insidious plot was lurking beneath the surface. A plot to exploit his position to compromise ongoing investigations, or perhaps to protect a criminal enterprise. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about David's infidelity or his personal deceit. This was a far grander, more insidious scheme, a network of corrupt officers. And David, I realized with a sickening lurch, was not just a participant. He was a key operative, a highly skilled facilitator. We uncovered a labyrinthine web of manipulated evidence, compromised informants, and deliberately botched investigations, all designed to protect a powerful criminal organization operating with impunity within the city. The affair with Sarah, the abuse of power, the subtle hints in the anonymous email, they were all interconnected, part of a larger, more sinister scheme. David wasn't just having an affair. He was compromised. He was using his position, his access to sensitive information, to facilitate these crimes, to protect the criminal enterprise. Sarah, I realized, was not just a mistress. She was a co-conspirator, an accomplice, using her position within the force to provide him with cover, to manipulate evidence, to ensure the success of their illicit operations. The anonymous email, I now understood, wasn't just a tip-off about an affair. It was a desperate plea for help, a cry for justice from someone within the department who had witnessed the corruption and dared to expose it. The betrayal was a dagger, but this deeper, more insidious truth felt like a poison, slowly seeping into the very core of my being. It hinted at a police corruption conspiracy that reached the highest levels, a network of dirty cops, and a criminal enterprise that had been operating with impunity, all under the guise of law enforcement. And I had only just scratched the surface of a truth that promised to unravel far more than just my marriage. This wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about a broken trust on a much grander, more manipulative, and potentially criminal scale. And I was now standing at the precipice of exposing a truth that would shake the very foundations of the city. Suddenly, every seemingly innocuous detail, every fleeting moment of unease, coalesced into a terrifyingly clear picture. David's late nights, his evasive answers, his unusual expenses, not just signs of infidelity, but the meticulous operational security of a seasoned criminal. The new apps on his phone, the obscure folders, not just personal interests, but specialized tools for encrypted communication and data manipulation. The subtle mentions of case files, of evidence tampering, of informant protection in his hushed phone calls, not just casual banter, but coded language for illicit operations. The hints I had dismissed as mere red flags of infidelity were, in fact, breadcrumbs leading to a vast criminal enterprise, a network of corrupt officers operating within the very heart of the police force. The anonymous email, with its cryptic references to internal police operations, was not just a random tip-off. It was a desperate plea from an insider, a silent cry for help from someone who had witnessed the corruption and dared to expose it. It was a carefully orchestrated act of defiance, designed to bring down a powerful criminal organization that had infiltrated the highest levels of law enforcement. David, I now understood, was not just a cheating husband. He was a highly trained operative, a facilitator par excellence, using his charm and his position to protect a criminal enterprise. He had used his impeccable reputation as a police officer, his seemingly altruistic motives, and even the emotional vulnerabilities of his colleagues as a shield for his illicit gains. He had played me, the department, and countless others like puppets on a string, all for the ultimate prize: vast sums of illicit profits and unchecked power in the criminal underworld. My initial triumph over him felt hollow, replaced by a cold, simmering rage at the audacity of this global scheme, its manipulative genius. They hadn't just cheated me, they had used me, exploited my trust, and turned my life into a stage for their criminal enterprise. But now, I had the knowledge. I had the true blueprint of their systemic deception. And this time, my retribution would be far more devastating, far more permanent. The game wasn't over. It had just entered a new, far more dangerous phase, one that would expose not just David, but the entire network of corrupt individuals who had helped this criminal organization build its empire on a foundation of police corruption and human exploitation. I stood before the assembled press, the glare of the cameras illuminating the intricate web of connections, the hidden truths of a global conspiracy, the secrets once buried in the shadows of police corruption, now screamed from every line of the indictment. The truth, once a whisper, was now a roar. They thought they had won. They thought they had gotten away with it. But they had underestimated me. They had underestimated the power of a woman scorned and the collective strength of a community united by truth. And they had forgotten one crucial detail. In the world of justice, every lie, every manipulated piece of evidence eventually leaves a trace. And some secrets, once unearthed, refuse to stay buried. They fester, they twist, and they will always find their way back to the surface. Because the real game, the one they never saw coming, has only just begun. And this time, there will be no escape. Not for David, not for Sarah, not for the criminal organization, not for anyone involved. The blueprint for their systemic destruction is now complete, and I'm ready to expose every single line of their hidden code. Are you ready to see what happens when the underworld of law enforcement reveals its darkest secrets?